Thank you so much for joining me today. Today we're going to go into the topic of why Jack Harlow's album didn't meet expectations. Obviously, the internet really kind of turned on him after that, and we're going to dive into whether that was warranted or not. So first of all, let's do a little backstory in case you haven't really kept up with this saga. On May 6th of this year, 2022, Jack dropped his album, Come Home, The Kids Miss You, which was very widely anticipated by a lot of people, including by me. As his last album, That's What They All Say, I think is genuinely a really good album, and there's a lot of great moments on there and a lot of soul and a lot of honesty that he really gets into on that album. There's just a lot of great songs. There's good hits. There's good deep tracks. I love a lot of songs on that. Rendezvous is great, and Fancy Seeing You Here is his best song in my opinion, and it is an amazing song. But let's talk about this album. Obviously, it first kind of started getting flack when First Class dropped. The sample went everywhere on TikTok, the whole snippet of the hook, and it was pretty catchy in that snippet, but then the whole song dropped, the verses weren't great, and people started to hate, and then the album came out and everyone kind of had the same take. So let's talk a little bit about First Class and why people didn't enjoy it that much. The hook is still very catchy. I think I have that song in my library. It's not something I come back to often, and I skip it usually when it comes on now. And I've tried not to let this whole public perception really influence my view. Obviously, it's going to some extent, but I've tried to make my own opinion on this album, as I'm friends with some big Jack Harlow fans who like this album, and I'm trying to balance between both sides and really see how I feel about this album. But the verses, I gotta admit, are not great. There's just something that it doesn't possess in that song. Maybe there's just no soul, but both verses don't really have any meaning. There's no concept to the song. It's just, rapping. Like, rapping for the sake of rapping, I guess, which isn't inherently bad, but for me and for some people that want more content in songs, or at least just more of a overarching narrative, it kind of missed the mark there. Some of the lines were bad, kind of things that maybe Drake could get away with, but even then, like, people would still not feel great about them. Some of the sound effects were weird, like the eagle at the beginning, like, just kind of threw me off. And again, there's really no meaning to them. He just kind of goes on a pop culture reference tangent. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. If you enjoy that, that's perfectly fine. But it's just not something I'm going to want to come back to because he doesn't really have anything to say. So now that we've finished talking about First Class, maybe I'll talk about it later if I really feel like it, but I'm going to look at the track list here. There's Talk of the Town, there's Young Harlezy, there's I'd Do Anything to Make You Smile. That's the first three. All of those kind of disappointed me. Just, they didn't have any soul, and I think that's what really music comes down to for me, is just having soul and having something you can feel what the artist put into them. And they all just feel very formulaic, I guess. They weren't terrible, but they just didn't have any nice melodies. Didn't have any great lyrics, to be honest, and just didn't really make me want to replay them at all. The first time I listened to it a couple times. I was like, they're all right. I don't hate it that much, but not great. Then there's like Dua Lipa, which is probably a pretty big hit and probably enjoyable for some people, but didn't really do anything to me. Again, the whole point of the song is Dua Lipa, do a feature, is the rhyme, and then he just went with that. And it just doesn't feel like there's anything there. Just he picks like a title and then just kind of goes off on a tangent on completely unrelated lines, which again is fine, but just not something I'm super interested in. Then there's songs that I actually enjoyed, like Side Piece and A Little Secret, that have more soul to them. He kind of gets on more of like an old school beat, some jazz influences in there on some part twos, and the beats definitely swayed me. He's not saying too much, but the hooks are a little bit catchy, and I like those songs. They're fine. Then there's Movie Star with Pharrell that I hate, to be completely honest. I think it's terrible. Just Pharrell's vocals on the hook are just not it. The beat is very and I just did not like listening to it. Then we're going to talk about a couple of them a little bit later, but then there's like a Blade of Grass, which I don't really remember. Parent Trap with Justin Timberlake, that was okay, but not something I was going to go back to. Poison with Lil Wayne, that was fine. It was a little bit catchy. Nail Tech wasn't anything great. And then there's The Closer. But we're going to talk about I Got a Shot, which is, I kind of like in a way, in like an ironic way. Like, it's hard to describe, but I enjoyed that song, especially when I'm with friends, like my Jack Harlow fan friends, and we can bump that song. It's catchy. It's not good, and I know it's not good, but it's one of those you can kind of almost ironically like bump to, if that makes sense. Like sometimes, like Cardi, not to hate on Cardi, I think Cardi makes actual good music sometimes, but almost like that, where you're kind of just enjoying the gimmick of the song and stuff like that. I can't really explain it as well as I'd like to, but I enjoy listening to that song. I'm never going to play it on my own time, but with friends, I think it's fun. And also, Lil Baby would sound great on that beat. As weird as that sounds, listen to the song if you really want to, but Lil Baby would be such a good feature. He would fit on it so well. Then there's Churchill Downs with Drake, which is a song I thought was going to be really good, and I would listen to it more if it was just a Drake song and just that Drake verse. Drake actually went off on that song. He has some lines that, again, are probably kind of corny, but it's Drake, so you get it, and it just works. He can pull those off. But Jack's verse is just kind of boring to me the more I listen to it, and now, whenever I go back to the song, which is rarely now at this point, I really would rather just skip his half of the song and then just get to Drake, which, on a pretty good beat and good bars, it's a fun time to listen to Drake there. But as just a Jack song, I don't enjoy it that much, and I'm not really going to go back to it very often. Then there's the closer, which is State Fair. One of my favorites. It feels a little more honest and a little more like That's What They All Say kind of song. It's a little bit soulful. It has some good lines and just some good, personable lyrics, I think, but still not something I'm listening to very often. But I listen to it more than some others, but still, it's been a while. So now let's talk about just kind of my overarching problems with this album. Again, there's no narrative, which it doesn't have. An album doesn't need a narrative to be good. It just needs the music to be good. But I think when the music is just generic and there's no narrative and there's no reason for it to be so generic and there's no story behind it, it just leaves me not wanting to go back. I feel like I need something to really make the album stand out, whether that is a story like it's Good Kid, Mad City, or just a really unique sound like it's Awaken My Love, which are just, I'm using as examples because they're right behind me. But I like narratives on albums, and even though albums without a clear narrative are still fine and I still enjoy them. Okay, I'm editing this and I realize I didn't make a point as well as I'd like to. So what I want to say is if an album doesn't have a narrative, then the music just needs to be way better. The music needs to be good enough for me to want to go back if the narrative isn't there. Let's say like Smino's Noir, I still can't say that name, but albums that don't have a clear narrative, but if it's just like a playlist of good song, good song, good song, good song, and so on, then I'm going to go back to it because it's just good music. Maybe it's unique sounding, maybe not, but just good music can negate the need for a narrative. But if the music is not great enough to stand on its own, then you need something to tie the album together to make sure it's a cohesive something. Like Drake's Honestly Nevermind, they have some replayability because they're catchy and they have just soul to them and they feel like they're songs that the artist really enjoyed putting together. As hard as that is to describe. But there's just really nothing on this album that stands out, and I hate to kind of make a negative video as I like to keep talking about music positive. I mean, there's music I don't like, but I don't really want to talk about it because hating is just no fun. But this album, just because it disappointed me and because I know he can make good music, just, it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And again, his album, That's What They All Say, wasn't perfect by any means. It didn't really have an overarching narrative, which is something I've said a lot in this video, but it had really good personable lyrics and really made you feel like you were in his world. And I think world building for an album is such an important part and is something that he could have done here, and he just didn't really capitalize. And though people probably hated it too much because it's not bad music, it's just kind of mainstream pop rap that doesn't have much life to it. Now, do I think it's the worst album of the year? No, I think I gave it like a C on my albums list just to kind of keep track of how I feel about albums, which is a completely fluid score based on just how I feel about the album. So it's not the worst. I mean, there's worse albums out there, but none really disappointed me like this because I really had hope that this was going to be the album of the summer, and it just wasn't. So Jack hopefully can get back in the lab and, find a more personable side of himself, because I think that is where he really excels, is him doing Drake-style songs where he's personable, he's charismatic, which obviously we all know, and just makes you really feel like you're in his world, and whether that's in his city or in his relationships or, whatever it may be. But I apologize if this is kind of an incoherent ramble. I tried my best to kind of stay on point. But thank you so much for watching. I really enjoyed talking about this, even though it's not an album that I love. Let me know more things I should talk about. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed it, and leave a comment down below. But again, thank you so much for spending your time with me here today, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.